You're listening to Juicy Radio. I'm your host, Tony Bacigalupo, and in this episode I'll be talking with Oren Salomon, who runs a co-working space in Dallas called Dallas Fort Work. I love myself some punny co-working space names. If you're trying to name your co-working space out there, I highly recommend you come up with a delightful punny name for your co-working space. You will not regret it. Anyway, Oren runs that great co-working space in Dallas. He and I have also worked together through Open Co-working, which manages the free resources of the co-working movement for the past year. Oren's a terrific friend, a brilliant guy, and just an awesome dude. And so I was really excited to just have a chance to spend some time catching up with him and to have the record button on. So in this episode, we'll be talking about what Oren learned while he was in Rio for the Olympics this year. And in addition to that, we'll be covering our wonderful obsession with Pokemon Go and even Pokemon Go at the Olympics, which is a fun topic unto itself, and ideas for how to take the inspiration from those kinds of experiences into our own communities. So that and so much more coming up right here on this episode of Juicy Radio, episode 6. Oren, I'm so excited to talk to you right now because you just got back from the Olympics, dude. Wow.
Yeah, Brazil was absolutely incredible. Despite what you may have heard on the news, it was somewhat safe to visit, and the water was drinkable, the food was edible, the people were extremely friendly, the games were excellent, and they're just as into Pokemon Go as we are.
Oh, man, did you... Oh, that's great.
Pokemon Go is, I think, a force that's bringing us together, much like co-working, and is often misunderstood. But it's a powerful force. So, whether it's in Brazil or, any other part of the world, I think the fact that you can walk up to strangers now and ask them if there's a Charizard around just makes the world a smaller place in a lot of ways.
Wow. Okay, so let's just get right into that. I feel like this is what we were destined to talk about today. Pokemon Go at the Olympics and why that's important for a co-working podcast.
Yeah, and I think something that should be said right off the bat about co-working is that a lot of people look at the medium and obsess about the medium of, oh, this is a co-working space. It must be a box of this precise size, almost looking like an office space with desks and people talking and interacting. And they focus so much on the medium that they forget about the people interacting, which is ultimately what everyone is shooting for. And that's really the garden in the medium. And I think the fabulous thing about Pokemon Go is it's this medium that everyone has rejected as a form of gardening, as a way of bringing people together. It's video games, right? It's the ultimate isolator. It's you sitting in your couch at home with a controller staring at a screen by yourself, and maybe your interaction is talking about it with your friends later at some other juncture, and then they added, internet connectivity. You can play with your friends over the internet. But now, for the first time in my experience, there's a game where you can go out and play with your friends in the real world, or just bump into total strangers and start connecting with them and having a common ground to build relationships with people that you would have just passed by the street and probably been creeped out if they'd said hi to you. And it just unlocks this whole new world of human interactions. And it was very similar to the first time I walked into a co-working space, seeing that, oh, wow, I could talk to the people that are next to me. I don't just have to, awkwardly ask for the Wi-Fi password and then go back to a corner and pretend like I don't acknowledge their existence.
That's beautifully put. I feel the same way with Pokemon Go. Noticed a lot of the same things happening here in Boulder, where we, my partner Amy and I, we've struck up conversations with all sorts of strangers. We have new friends now, old and young. I mean, every demographic I feel like I've seen playing this game. And so
it's the ultimate unifier. I mean, it strikes all chords, and the fact that the game is 20 years old, I really think helps that, or the core franchise of the game, because I think that people like me and you remember it, in our middle to late childhood, and people that were even a little bit older than us remember it as a game that came out. And those people's parents are like, oh, I remember when my kid played that. And that really stretches it all the way up into the 60s. And I've seen people even into their 70s playing this game.
It's terrific, and I'm also finding that I'm exercising more. Amy and I now are at the point where we're going on quests in the morning to conquer a number of gyms, either by running or by biking. And so it's actually getting us exercising again, which is just, it's so crazy, all the different dynamics. And the marketing side of things is getting all turned upside down too. And there's just so many interesting aspects to it. But you're right, the community side is interesting. And I have to wonder, I have to imagine that you have a story from Rio of people you actually met there and interacted with around Pokemon Go. Is there something you can share with us?
So I didn't see that many people playing it in Rio as I would have expected. But I spent 2 days in Sao Paulo on the way out for my trip. And it was really interesting because the people were kind of clustered around certain areas catching Pokemon. And it was almost like you could spot where the next neighborhood that you wanted to walk around in was based off of where these little clusters were. Because as soon as you discovered someone playing it, you realized that the reason they were all there was like an extreme density of Pokestops. And the Pokestops were usually like really badass like street art murals. And so if there was a bunch of people playing Pokemon, it meant that it was a neighborhood that had a lot to offer. And it was able to discover this much quicker than through something like TripAdvisor or even any sort of journal, because I was seeing it live and the people themselves were kind of the cue that was a neighborhood worth exploring. The one thing I did see in Rio that was pretty awesome, I'll have to share the photo with you, was at the 100-meter final where I saw Usain Bolt win his third straight. There was actually someone who had modified the Brazilian flag and took out the globe at the center and just put in a Pokeball. And that was kind of my first cue to like, wow, this game has really gotten big here, because the game only actually released the day before the Olympics. So this fever that I was catching was almost like the USA had been having it for, I think, almost 6 weeks at that point. So, some people would say that it was dying down, and just to see this explosion, freshly in another country in a different context, it just kind of gave me hope that this game has a lot of longevity.
So you were saying that you actually were able to use the mechanics of the game to get a sense of where you should go and check out new neighborhoods while you were there.
Yeah. And basically, at first, especially in Rio, so I went to Rio first, and, I kind of bought into the hype that it was unsafe and, followed all of the standard ways to protect yourself. And one of those is to not have your phone out. And even my Airbnb host, when I checked in, had joked about like, well, don't be out there playing Pokemon because that's a dead giveaway that you're a tourist that's easy to rob. So I didn't really feel that safe doing it in Rio, and I kind of only did it around the Olympic venues. And, I bumped into a few people, but nothing of substance. But then in Sao Paulo, when I saw these clusters of people, I mean, I'm talking like maybe 300 or 400 people all around like a square, all within, maybe 100 square foot radius of each other, just like all hunched up against each other playing this game. I realized that it was safe to bust out your phone because, how could I be any more vulnerable than them? And it was kind of like strength in numbers. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, wow, there's these people, they feel comfortable busting out their phones. Maybe I'll join the fray. And then as soon as I opened it up, I started looking at what the Pokestops were, and I was like, wow, I want to visit all these places. And so the Pokemon app, the map inside the app pretty much just became a guide to walking around the neighborhoods and being able to know what was a few feet away from you, at the same time as collecting, Pokeballs and potions and what have you.
So, okay, so I'm losing count of all of the ways that this game is changing things, and is really interesting. But you actually are now saying that when you were in Sao Paulo, and okay, so you're in South America, you're in a foreign country, you don't know where's safe and where isn't. That you found hundreds of people playing this game, congregating, and that helped you to feel safe. Like, not just to take out your phone to play the game, but you actually felt safety there by virtue of being surrounded by fellow Pokemon players. I mean, that's really interesting.
Yeah. I didn't actually put it together like that until you mentioned it. But yeah, that's exactly what happened. And this all happened instantaneously. And I was able to, I think normally if you see a crowd in a foreign country, you're automatically outside of it. Even if they're watching a street performer or something you think is universal, you assume some sort of cultural gap. But with this game, I knew exactly what they were doing with I think, no gaps in understanding. They were all just trying to catch something rare.
And did you, I assume you don't speak Portuguese. How did you communicate?
I'd say Brazil is one of the few countries I've been to where the rate of people speaking a second language is about as low as the U.S. And I think everyone there expects you to speak Portuguese to get by. I guess my mistake was I thought that English would get you some mileage, or my other language, Spanish, would get you some mileage just because it's so similar to Portuguese. But nobody really speaks Spanish either. So it was incredibly difficult to communicate with locals. And I did end up picking up a little bit of Portuguese. I could use the numbers and some basic constructions, but other than that, Google Translate was definitely the way to go. I would type up something on my phone, then hand it to someone, and they would type up something, and that was usually how I got by.
Were you able to get anywhere by talking Pokemon? I mean, were you able to kind of, two people don't speak the same language, but everyone understands Charizard, or
No, I didn't really. I didn't really break in that sense. Bumped into a few people and talked about different Pokemon, but they all spoke English, or we talked about the Pokemon in English. But yeah, that would have been really cool to have an interaction like that.
Still an incredible story, and funny because, I mean, you'd think just going to Brazil for the Olympics alone is a story enough. And so I'm curious, when I watch the Olympics from here, just watching the achievement that these people have done, everyone who's there, it's just such an inspiring experience. And I know you're an entrepreneur, you're a leader of communities. What kind of a takeaway did you get from being there and witnessing that and being a part of what was happening?
That's a really interesting take. So I think, first of all, the level of athletics and performance is unrivaled. Rarely do you collect such diverse talents in athleticism and get to see them all on display in such a short period of time. I think that they really captivate, the human imagination. You get to see someone like, Michael Phelps or Simone Biles or Usain Bolt, almost superhuman, where you collect the best in the world, and then there's that much of a gap between them and the rest of them. It's truly humbling and awe-inspiring, but a lot of my attention, being so close to the ground, wasn't so much on the performance, but kind of how the organization of the event, who kind of puts it all together, what role the athletes have, and kind of think of it in the same way of, the disruptions that have occurred in office space and how co-working is organized. And one of the things that stood out to me was that how dependent the athletes are on the organization to make this event happen. And I think that the ultimate symbol of powerlessness in the Olympics for the athletes are boxers, and particularly the Cuban boxers. It's an all amateur event, and these people are effectively postponing their professional abilities, their professional opportunities, I should say, to be in the Olympics. And sometimes people can suspend it for up to 10 or 15 years just to get their chance waiting in the pecking order to be the person to compete. And almost every country where the boxer has a chance to be actual professional, the boxers from that country are 20 or 21 at the oldest, whereas the Cuban boxers are sometimes 35, and who knows if they're even telling the truth on their age. Obviously, that's a sliding scale. Not every sport is like that. There's a lot of millionaire athletes, but I think at the end of the day, they all kind of rely on the organization to bring their talents to the world. And I saw a lot of abuses on that. I saw a lot of times where, the fact that someone had trained their whole life to get to this moment wasn't fully respected, either by the organization or the fans. I think the most part, people were very, very thankful and just excited to see that kind of thing. But I guess the disturbing thing to me was kind of who does hold this power, and how do they take advantage of the fans, or just people who want to be involved with the Olympics. Olympics is an organization that makes billions and billions and billions of dollars every year, and yet all the people that you interact with on the ground, for the most part, are either volunteers or minimum wage employees. And it just makes you wonder where that money goes and who is serving, and when you participate in an event, what kind of things are you perpetuating? And I'd like to think that the coming together of people independently and the fans kind of outweighs that for me. And that's really what I go for, is that, people are getting price gouged for tickets and we're being served by volunteers and minimum wage employees. But the other audience there is people that you'd never get to see, sports fans from other countries. And even if you went and visited, let's say you went to a soccer game in France or Spain and you saw a bunch of Spanish people or a bunch of French people at that match, you still wouldn't have the collection of people from all over the world all at once. And that's really what draws me to an event like that, is the opportunity to see dozens or hundreds of cultures all mishmashing together. And it's a beautiful thing. It's just sad that it has to take place in a setting put together by such corrupt organizations.
All right, so let's get back to co-working and your experience with it, your interest in it, and I guess it's nice that we took some time to talk not about co-working first, so we have a little bit of a context here. And so you have been active in the co-working world for a long time. You've been active specifically in Dallas and in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. And I'm wondering what your perspective is on co-working, why it's important to you, why you dedicate yourself to it as opposed to, alternative Olympic Games. And and I guess we'll get to GCUC Canada and your thoughts and your feelings around going to co-working conferences. But why don't you give me your overall vibe on why you're in co-working in the first place?
Sure. So I kind of stumbled into co-working as a user of co-working. And at the time, Dallas really only had one co-working space, and it was pretty far from where I was living at the time. And it was out of a house, which I always thought was a little bit weird. But I didn't even know about it until after I discovered co-working in other cities. And basically, I came to discover it just from a pure necessity and a recommendation. And basically what was happening was I was working as a freelancer, doing primarily remote work in QA and project management for software, mainly iPhone apps at the time. And just because I had the ability to work from wherever I wanted as a remote worker, doing contract work, I said, okay, I'm going to take this period of my life and just travel as much as I can. Be careful with that one, because I caught the travel bug and I'm still of that mentality even after that phase of life. But I was traveling all over the country, visiting friends from college and other places, and was visiting a friend in LA. And I asked him if I could go work at his office, because at the time I was pretty much working from anywhere that had stable internet connection, power, and close enough to coffee that I could go out and refill. And I was used to working from, couches at friends' apartments, coffee shops, hotel executive centers, friends' offices, conference rooms of clients. I mean, literally anything that I could beg, borrow, or steal, I was there working, and I was happy. And my friend said, okay, well, you can't go with me to work because I work for the Aerospace Corporation and you need a security clearance to work in my office, but you should go to this place in downtown Santa Monica called Coloft. I think it's for people like you. And I said, okay, I don't know what this Coloft thing is, but I'll go try it out. And so I went there and I said, hey, I'm here to pay for my first day of co-working. And they're like, oh no, your first day's free. And I immediately got thrown for a loop, because I've never walked into a store and said, here's my money, I'd like to buy something. And they said, no, this is free. That's never happened to me in my entire life. And it struck me because I thought it was strange. And so I thought, oh, okay, this must be like their free sample. And I was like, I've had those before. I didn't usually come in asking for it, but I've had a free sample, so I know what that is. So I said, oh no, don't give me the free sample, because I'm only here probably for today, and I don't think I'm going to come back, so you should just take my money. And they said, no, even if you never come back here again, we still think that you deserve to have your first day of co-working for free. And then I got thrown for an even bigger loop, because I was like, okay, this definitely isn't the free sample. They're just being kind and generous, but they're a business. They're not supposed to be kind and generous. So I kind of just sat down and accepted that. And so I asked for the Wi-Fi password. I got on. It was a real place. It had real Wi-Fi, so I wasn't getting scammed. And then they come over and they say, hey, do you drink coffee? And I'm like, yeah. How much is it? And they're like, no, it's free. Just take it. And I was like, okay. So I took the free cup of coffee, and I was starting to get a little bit more weirded out, because it was like, okay, they're not only giving me the free sample, space, whatever. I get that there's no incremental cost there, but they're actually giving me coffee. So they're spending money on these gifts to give me, even though they know I'm not coming back. Something's up. And then they say, okay, what kind of work do you do? And I started telling them. And then they start bringing over other members that work in the same field. And I'm like, what the hell? You're like introducing me to people who are like making me feel a part of this community and this place that I'm not a part of. I'm just visiting. And I had a great day there. I got a lot of work done, met a lot of people, still talk to some of those people. And I, thought nothing of it. I thought it was these crazy California hippies. I thought it must be the only place in the world that operated like that. And just kind of went back to Dallas, kept traveling around, didn't really think much of it. 6 months later, I was in Chicago and visited a friend of mine out there, and very similar thing happened. Couldn't work at her office, so she said to go to this place called the Coop. Sounded a lot like Coloft to me. Called themselves a co-working space. I called them up, asked about the first day. They said that it was free, and so I went and met Jocelyn Navarre there. Oh, and the person at Coloft, by the way, was Chris Dumler. Met Jocelyn. Same exact thing happened. First day was free. Gave me a free cup of coffee. It was really good there because it was Intelligentsia coffee. Introduced me to the community there. I met some people like Sam Rosen, who I'm still friends with to this day, and a few other members there that had a very nice interaction. Again, it was super productive. And I kind of went home and I started thinking to myself, wow, how could it be that these two co-working spaces on complete opposite sides of the country operated the same? Oh, and by the way, when I went to, this was the craziest part, when I went to the Coop, I asked them if they'd heard of Coloft, and they said they'd never heard of it. And I was like, how could it be that these two spaces, halfway across the country could be operating under the same model and have the same kind of kindness and generosity and make me feel so welcome? And keep in mind, this is out of the South, by the way, where people are hospitable. These are in places that are traditionally cold to other people, LA and Chicago. Made me feel right at home and welcome in their communities. And I started realizing as I started researching online that this thing was way bigger than these two spaces. And this was 2010 and 2011. So the co-working movement was already, 4 or 5 years old. And there was all this documentation online. There was this Google group. There was this wiki. And people were basically putting their business plans, their member agreements, all of this online for free to share. And they all wanted spaces like this to exist all over the country and all over the world. And it wasn't a franchise model, and nobody was collecting royalties. It was just this awesome thing that people started doing for each other that started popping up all over the place. And honestly, ever since then, once I discovered that, and once I started tapping in and talking to people like Alex Hillman and yourself and Jacob Sales, and starting to realize that this was something that was attainable and something that Dallas could offer, I thought it was a no-brainer to dive straight in and make it happen. And it was really the support of those people that enabled me to do that. And not just the support of the documentation and the resources, but the moral support and yeah, you can do it. We did it too. And not only did we do it, but we kind of laid the groundwork so that you don't have to actually figure out how to keep your doors open. We already went through that phase. Yeah, it's been a wild ride ever since, but that's how it all started.
And now you're in Dallas and you're leading a co-working group there. How has that story evolved? What kind of an impact has your community had on that city since you've gotten active there?
Yeah, so we started in 2012, right at the end there. And the interesting thing is that all the oldest spaces in Dallas opened within like 2 or 3 months of each other. And ever since then, I think co-working has kind of cemented its foothold in the city. And there's a lot of different communities that have kind of grown as a result. I think they were already starting to percolate and pop up, but I think they were maybe missing venues for these people to intersect on a regular basis. And those communities would be the tech and startup community, the art community, specifically photography, has totally boomed in the past 4 or 5 years. I think it's a large part due to co-working spaces. Social media groups, marketing groups, all these different online marketing groups, all these different groups that were having meetups once every 1 or 2 months. And the communities were starting to form and had maybe 50 or 100 people regularly going to these things, have all shot up to 500, 1,000 people, all interacting on a much more regular basis. And I definitely don't take credit on an individual basis, but I think that the co-working had a big part to do with that. And as I see Dallas kind of growing into its own, Dallas, it's a very interesting city because it's big enough to be considered a world-class city, but for a lot of different reasons, it's always struggled for its place at the table. I think the other American cities kind of try to box us out and don't want to recognize that, we're bigger than a lot of the cities that get top billing, like San Francisco or Boston. But I think that having the works and the companies to kind of legitimize the city has been very important in kind of earning our spot at the table.
Well put, Oren, and I think that one of the things that continues to inspire me is the people like you and the people you mentioned, actually the exact people that you mentioned, and just this culture that seems to have emerged among some of the co-working space owners, some of the earliest ones. And one of the things that I'm wanting to get a sense of now, and this is a conversation I'd like to have with you even if we weren't recording it, is, and we have talked about it a little bit, how to continue to preserve and cultivate the kind of culture and kind of experience among the leadership, among the people who are running these communities that you experienced that inspired you to become a leader yourself in this movement, and how to continue to kind of grow that while acknowledging and allowing for the fact that at the same time, co-working is becoming this big money established industry. And so I don't want to be just kind of reaching for the past or trying to take something with us that really can't come with us. But at the same time, I know that there's something there that's special and important, and you know it too. And I'd hate for that to go away. I want to see that continue to grow. And, like a lot of the people, actually the people that you mentioned, Coloft and at the Coop, those people who started that have all moved on now, right? And so where is that going to continue? I guess there are people like you and like others who were inspired by them and have gone on to build their own things. But I'm wondering what we can do to kind of keep this ball rolling and continue to inspire the next generation of leaders. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Wow. So I actually only just found out 15 seconds ago that Co-op's closed.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Wow. I have to read up from that. I knew about the Coop. I knew that Salmon sold that a few years back, but wow, that dates my experiences now. I now experience things that cannot be experienced anymore. So I think that speaks to the urgency of this need. So first of all, if anyone wants to have a co-working experience where they can have their first day free, come to downtown Dallas. I'll be happy to provide that experience for you. But as far as how to kind of think about this on a much broader scale, I think that, it really comes back to the core principles of co-working, that's set forth on the wiki and elsewhere. But I think that the two that really kind of hit home here are three: openness, accessibility, and sustainability. How do we keep the core alive and perpetual? And that's definitely sustainability. And I think the ways that we achieve that are through openness and accessibility. And openness being, allowing co-working to adapt as we move through time and as the needs change. And accessibility and allowing the leadership to be as democratized as possible. And when you talk about that core group of kind of early founders, and some of them have moved on, and it's they're not really active. I'm thinking of people like Tara Hunt or Chris Messina or even Brad Newberg. There's still that camaraderie and friendship, but I think there's this understanding that they've kind of passed the torch, and I think that's a very healthy way to look at it, where they're not trying to drive the narrative of co-working into the past. They've said, hey, we put it out there. It's to evolve and to keep growing. So I think that we have the ethos in place to keep it going and to keep that heart in place. But I think knowing the history is really important. I always try to share it with my members or other co-working leaders, especially when I have a chance, because I think that really the thing that makes co-working so special, not just how awesome the people involved are, but it's really that Brad Newberg made it open from day one, and he open sourced it and made it so that it could be its own thing and adapt. And even though we may be troubled by some of the developments of co-working and how corporate it's become in some aspects, I think that's just part of the openness, and we have to accept that. And we have to find a way to keep the core alive and available. And this kind of leads into the next topic, which is I think that co-working conferences can be a really good venue for that. I think it definitely depends on who's speaking and who's attending. But for me, it's the only time in my life that I've ever got to have people like you, Ashley, Jacob, Alex, Adam, Angel, Craig, all within the same room together. I think you could kind of think of certain juicies or certain co-working conferences as the Olympics of co-working. They bring together the people from all over the world in the same space. I actually met someone at when Juicy was in Berkeley, Matias, and I was down in Sao Paulo. And I actually forgot that he lived in Sao Paulo. And I was just posting photos on Facebook, and he said, hey, why didn't you let me know you were in Brazil? I was like, oh, I forgot you lived down here. I actually met up with him my last day. And that was really the only day that I was by myself on the trip. All the people I've been traveling with had gone home, different flight arrangements. And so I got to have a friend on the last day, even though I totally thought I was going to hang out by myself. And we walked around the street fair and met all these interesting people. And, I think that in terms of understanding co-working beyond the context of your city and beyond the context of the things you think that shape it and mold it, I think that co-working conferences give you a window into the co-working lives of others. in a way that you'd never get to experience otherwise. So, I have made it a point throughout my career to travel to other cities and visit the co-working spaces in those cities and meet the leaders in those places and see what their environments are like. And so I guess that's enabled me to go to places like Co-Loft and the Coop and even New York City and see them in their time and understand and appreciate them. And even if those spaces are closed, I'm still applying the lessons I saw in those spaces. So I think that putting yourself out there and traveling and getting to know the spaces beyond your own is really the way to keep that kind of initial ethos alive. And on the other side of it, to be with open arms and welcoming those people when they come through your door.
Well put, Oren, and I think that that's a great sort of way to leave things off, because that's ultimately where we're going. We're passing things forward to new people, and every conference is a chance to inspire new leaders and to make new friends and new connections. And hey, you never know, you're going to end up being in a foreign country and realize that you have a friend there, and that's a terrific thing. So I hope that a lot of the folks who are listening come join us in GCUC Canada in Montreal in October, and hopefully we can make some new friends.
Absolutely. And I'll actually be speaking at the conference. Didn't get a chance to really talk about in this episode, but I'm also a beekeeper, and I'll be sharing some of the lessons I've learned about human behavior from bees and how that applies to running a co-working space. Spectacular.
I'm looking forward to it, Oren. Thanks so much for the call. Thanks so much for your time. And keep on catching those Pokemon, and we'll compare Pokédexes in Montreal.
Absolutely. Hopefully we can go out for a walk and catch them and take over some teams.
I'm looking forward to it.
Which team are you, by the way?
Oh, I'm a blue team for life.
Team Mystic.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Thank goodness.
Team.
Awesome. All right. You heard it here first, folks. GCUC Canada is going to have a major Poke Walk. I think we're going to have a lot of fun with that. So, Oren, thanks again so much for your time, and I'll see you soon.
All right. Take care, Tony. Thanks for the call.
All right. Thanks again for joining us here at GCUC Radio. Again, if you want to grab tickets for the GCUC Canada Conference, you can find out more about that at canada.juicy.co. Just head to juicy.co and you can find links to all of the upcoming GCUC conferences there. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have thoughts on this episode or GCUC Radio in general or co-working in general, or just how you want to make the world a better place, shoot me an email. My email is tony@nwc.co, and you can find me at TonyBeGood on Twitter. So that's all for this episode of GCUC Radio. In the meantime, keep making the world a better place for everyone around you, and keep being awesome.